This week on Friends on Film, we're talking about our favorites of 2024, one of the movies we didn't like all that much, and then we'll be talking about what we're looking forward to in 2025. This is Friends on Film. Hello and welcome back to Friends on Film, the movie podcast where two friends sit and talk about some of their favorite things in the world, mostly movies. I'm Michael, and joining me here once again is Benjamin Trevino. Ben, how are you doing?
I'm doing all right. I'm doing great, man. I'm glad I'm actually able to re-record this because I did see some things a little bit after our last recording, and I thought maybe I should shout out at some point in this video. But yeah, I'm feeling a lot better now that I'm re-recording this, actually.
Yeah, in case you guys aren't aware, we already recorded this episode, but we were trying out something new with two mics, and I thought I had gotten it right. Turns out some of the audio was bleeding into one another, making the audio unusable.
Yikes.
So we agreed to re-record. So some of the stuff we've already talked about, but we've both seen some new things. We've both heard some great things coming forward. So I don't think too much is going to change. I think we may have even more to say now that we're thinking about all these things.
Yeah.
And it's our first time we're also re-recording an episode. So that's two experiments in 1 week.
There you go.
So with all that in mind, we're going to get now into what we considered our least favorite movie experience of 2024. A lot of people call it worst of the year, and I don't know, worst, it defines that it should never happen again. And there are some things on this movie, I think you and I both have the same one.
Yeah,
but
still the same one if I had to imagine. Yeah.
I have seen some things from everybody, from both the business side and creative side, that these people can do something good, so clearly something got lost in translation. But yeah, unfortunately, for me, and I believe for you, Madam Web was just not the funnest time.
Madam Web was just, I went into that movie thinking I could get something good out of it in terms of like roasting it, because I did see the trailer for it and it did not look like anything that appealing to me. And on top of all that, it's just, once you actually see the movie, and then it's not only just the pacing, the acting, it's just everything the movie is as a whole. It fails in so many categories, and that's just the worst thing. And it's just boring on top of everything. That was the worst. That's the worst crime the movie can commit above all. And it's also, sadly, one of those movies that Sony every now and then makes, mainly the superhero movies, where I'm not going to say you see a lot in the trailer, but you see some stuff promised in the trailer, and it doesn't really come into fruition until like near the end of the movie. Mm-hmm. I don't know how else to say without spoiling.
Now, I will say the director of this film is S.J. Clarkson.
Yeah.
And she is actually a pretty strong television director from everything I've seen. Recently, my brother has been going through the Defenders Netflix Marvel shows.
Yeah, I remember
and she directed the very first episode of The Defenders.
Okay.
So this is clearly a director who knows what she's doing. And I also want to make it clear, I do not hate this movie because it's women-led or women anything.
I could really care less about the fact that it was all women characters. I'm like, okay, fine, just give me a good movie. That's all I'm asking.
And there are talented people in this. Dakota Johnson, Sydney Sweeney, Isabella Merced.
Yeah, I forgot Isabella Merced was in this. Thank God she had better stuff that she came out in later this year.
Yeah, and it's not I can say, I actually don't hate the concept of this. I actually will say, unlike you in the trailer, I was actually intrigued. This idea that it's a regular person whose whole job is wanting to who can go back in time just a little bit, see things before they can happen, and then turn back time just enough to try and prevent it. There's a lot of really cool scenarios you can do with that concept.
Well, the original concept was a still pretty cool scenario. I think I brought this up in the interview, the pod, the first recording we did, which was that the idea was very much like Terminator. The villain in this movie, whose name I'm blanking on, Ezekiel Sims. Yeah, what a not the worst villain name I've ever heard, but still pretty generic. He is sent back, not in time, but he can see his future ending with a spider person defeating him, and the person he goes after is Peter Parker's mother. I'm blanking on her name. I think it was Mary Parker.
Yeah.
So that already was a good idea to begin with. Like,
Right.
do something like the Terminator, and then Madam Web kind of intervenes here and there and says, like, this needs to happen. Something like that.
I also think the idea of the other three spider people is intriguing just because I think Across the Spider-Verse introduced this idea of, well, there's the canon events, there's these people trying to do this, but right now they're in a flux state.
Yeah.
And so there's this idea that there's three spider people, and maybe you could have said Madam Web has her power because she's has maybe had the birth of her birth involves somehow having control over the sacred timeline or something like that.
Yeah, but unfortunately, the movie. I think the worst thing, also, aside from it being boring, is that it's also one of those movies where. Well, we probably brought this up a little earlier. It felt like it was given all the same studio notes you got from like movies that were successful in the 2000s, which makes sense because the movie takes place in the year 2003, and it's like it's trying to recapture something of that quality from the 2000s, which
That honestly makes sense why the cinematography is the way that it is, because it's trying to capture that color palette and the Sam Raimi style that made the Spider-Man film so popular. And honestly, I'll say that's not a bad choice.
it's not a bad choice, but it still got all the wrong kind of notes. And I don't mean to drag about a particular person, but Avi Arad, I don't think, was a producer on this movie.
He was an executive producer. I know one of the head producers, his name is Pavel Patek, I believe is his name.
Yeah.
He stepped away from the film itself.
Okay, so I'm actually kind of shocked because for those who don't know, Avi
Well, he didn't
Arad-
step away from the film. He has stepped away from Sony now that all the films that he was involved in did not do well.
Yeah, so just to give like a little small detail, Avi Arad is a producer who's been working with Marvel since what, the 90s?
95.
Since 95, and he's been involved in a lot of those early 2000s Marvel movies. And yes, some of them are fine, but some of them don't exactly hit the same as they probably did back when they came out.
Yeah.
If I'm being honest.
Arad, I think he is at his best as a producer when he was with Sam Raimi on the first two Spider-Men. He truly let Raimi have the reins and said, what does Raimi need in order to make it work? And it's clear that he also loves this character. Actually, the animated
very
Spider-Man
much, yeah.
series, that animated Spider-Man series that came out, the story for the Black Suit Spider-Man, it was written by him and Stan Lee, which is now the one that everyone has definitively gone with. So suddenly when you hear that, it makes sense why he really wanted Venom for Spider-Man 3, because that's a character he greatly admires.
Yeah.
But we also know that potentially because after he really tried to make something with the Amazing Spider-Man films that were a bit too subversive, I think, even at the time, and weren't as well executed as they could have been.
It was very much a case of, he was trying to build up not just Venom really in those movies, but he was also just trying to build up the Sinister Six, which is what this whole freaking universe seems like it was always just trying to do. We want the Sinister Six to come in. And
But I also believe, now that I'm thinking about it, Arad probably lost some creative control after Amazing Spider-Man 2.
Yeah.
Because Amy Pascal in the leaked Sony documents and leaked emails said that Avi Arad needs to step aside. And Amy Pascal has been really the one running with like a lot of the Tom Holland Spider-Man stuff, and Arad is more been involved with the Spider-Verse stuff with Lord and Miller.
Yeah, that makes sense. And that's probably with the Spider-Verse, at least the animated movies, that's probably the only good thing that this whole Sony Spider-Man multiverse has given us.
Well, and I think they have created some cool things. Like Amy Pascal produced Challengers with Zendaya earlier last year, and by all accounts, that movie was great.
Yeah.
Sydney Sweeney made some great connections on this film, along with Celeste O'Connor. Isabella Merced is now going to be in the DCU as the engineer for Superman. And I will say that Tahar Rahim, who played Ezekiel, he is the best part of the movie. And sure, the dialogue may not be the best, and the ADR isn't the greatest, but I will say he is the one who feels like he is trying the hardest to fully play this role.
Maybe it's just all the bad technicality stuff that happens whenever, he's talking and then the camera isn't even facing him and somehow we get ADR. And that's definitely not on him. That's on the director and the rest of the crew for all that.
Overall, Madam Web was it wasn't my favorite experience, but I do think that S.J. Clark can come back from this. I think if she directs something that is really, she can go on a small or medium budget film and show her talent again. I think she can do it.
Yeah.
I mean, Sydney Sweeney is off doing some great things. Isabella Merced, Celeste O'Connor is off doing some cool stuff as well. I have no doubt that Tahar Rahim is going to do something pretty cool.
We'll see, but
well.
this is another just one of those cases where, and I'll just leave it at this. When it comes to the Sony universe, and even though you don't have Spider-Man, I mean, I haven't seen Craven, but here's one way we probably would have probably gotten a good Craven movie, which would be, why not have him go after Venom? I want to start connecting these movies at some point with Madam Web saying how everything's connected or the future hasn't begun, but I'm not saying I could have fixed this universe at all, by all means. I'm just saying, hey, I mean, that was one of your coolest storylines in Spider-Man 2, the game. Why not just interweave it into your universe?
That's a completely great point. Unfortunately, the universe might be done.
Yeah.
And they're just going to stick with Spidey. And hey, Tom Holland just got engaged to Zendaya, and he's already said once they have kids, he's going to step back from acting to raise them.
Yeah.
Which, good on him,
Good on
Tom.
him, yeah.
We love you. You're a king for that. And so, but it does mean time is limited.
Mm-hmm.
And as it should be. I think that's the way it should be. I think once, I will say for the Spider-Man things, what I would personally like to see happen is once Tom Holland is done as Peter, we step away from Peter for a bit and go into Miles Morales. I think it's time for Miles to be in live action. And we know that after Beyond the Spider-Verse, they're going to start talking about those options.
That's probably true. Then we could probably see other Spider people. Of course, we are. Like Spider-Man Noir is getting that TV series coming this year, I believe, on Amazon.
I think so. I know they've shut down production due to the fire, but...
Oh, okay, that makes sense, yeah.
Which they should. But I am wanting to see... I am curious to see how Nick Cage is going to do as an older Peter Parker in the 40s.
Yeah.
That's going to be fun.
We could probably get, Spider-Man 2099 with Miguel O'Hara.
Mm-hmm.
And we could probably get Ben Reilly at some point.
I think for MCU or Sony's other Spider-Man movies going forward, I think Miles is your best option.
Probably, yeah, because he's still but he's still he can be a relatable Spider-Man for some folks.
Oh, yeah. I think he's relatable just in general. And that's what I really, really love about him. And it's as Stanley said, and it can be anybody under the mask. And I think Miles is the perfect representation of that.
Yeah.
And I think the Spider-Verse films have done a wonderful job showing how it can be Peter Parker under the mask, but then you have Gwen can be under the mask. You can have Miles under the mask. You can have Miguel under the mask.
Mm-hmm. You could have a pig under the mask.
Yes, with the voice of John Mulaney. And that's the appeal of Spider-Man that I think works so well with people. And I think if Miles is there, it's only going to broaden that inspiration for years and years to come.
Yeah, and we already have him in a Spider-Verse multiverse movie, so might as well interweave him in somehow.
I think the cutest thing I ever saw working at Flix was there was a kid who was off to go see like the Avengers films, Infinity War with his parents, and I asked him, "Oh, who's your favorite Spider-Man?" And he said, "Oh, Miles Morales." Little white kid, and he was like, Miles is my favorite.
Aww.
So he's definitely got a massive broad appeal that I think will work out just so well.
Nice. Moving forward in our little adventure of film throughout the year, here are some of our favorite movie experiences, meaning our favorite movies of the year. But there have been some great experiences per se. Like here's one that comes to mind. Us going to the 25th anniversary of Phantom Menace.
That was so fun, and that was technically around my birthday too. So thank you for that. Seeing Phantom Menace on the big screen was like, as a kid, it was like my little kid was like, oh my gosh.
Same. I hadn't seen Phantom Menace on the big screen back when it came out because I was only 4 and I wasn't quote unquote old enough to see a Star Wars movie yet. Then my parents got me started on the original trilogy. And then, of course, that had been out on VHS by the time. And then I saw Attack of the Clones at a birthday party, and I saw Revenge of the Sith. I want to say I was with my folks and some friends at that point. And that reminds me, this year is going to be Revenge of the Sith's 20th anniversary.
Disney, I am begging you, please re-release Revenge of the Sith in theaters. I didn't get to see this one in theaters.
See, we gotta...
And my brother really, really wants to see it too.
We gotta end the cycle for him, just as we did for me, because that was me, like, end the cycle. It ends here. Yeah, now that I've seen Phantom Menace in theaters, and I'm saying that unironically.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
And that was such a fun experience. But other movies brought us to so many different worlds or showed us worlds beyond our own. And the one that came to mind is we went back to Oz in my third favorite movie of the year, Wicked, Part 1.
Yeah.
Man, John M. Chu is a director that, sans Gem and the Holograms, he has made great movie after great movie.
I can't entirely attest to that, but what I will say is ever since his movies with Crazy Rich Asians, at least, and In the Heights, I will say a lot. I will say, I was like, why wasn't this guy hired for the West Side Story remake? But I'm not, that isn't just because I haven't seen a remake yet. But he seemed like the kind of guy for that movie.
Oh yeah, Spielberg killed it with West Side Story.
Now,
so.
that being said, he totally killed it with this movie.
Oh, he absolutely came out swinging. I think what he did so brilliantly is both you and I have seen the stage show. You actually saw it on the West End.
Yes, I did. It was really fun.
But he took what was so great about the theatrical, just the first act here, because part one is the first act. He took everything that was great about it, amplified it, and then added things that made sense to make this story work. And as I was walking out, I was like, yeah, you could not have done the entire show as one movie.
Yeah.
Well, you could have. I don't think it could have been as good as this.
Yes, it's very much that case of like kind of like what Peter Jackson was doing with Lord of the Rings. He was like, what can we keep? What can we keep and change it up a little bit? And what can we take away because that's not important? Mm-hmm. That's always going to be the thing that happens when you're adapting something. It's when it comes to changes, y'all, here's the thing. If we did straight up, I'm not saying that there hasn't been a successful version by version adaptation of something, none that I've seen yet personally. But sometimes shot-by-shot adaptations aren't always the best. Case in point, Stephen King's adaptation of, Stephen King's The Shining.
Yeah.
That was very much, it was a, I don't remember if it was ABC that ran this miniseries, but it's like a 4-hour-long movie, essentially, that follows the book The Shining. And when I mean follows it pretty much to the letter of the word, the whole book. And that is a really thick book that does have a lot of creepy things in it, but for some reason, not only are we following the book, but we're not very good at creating a sense of terror. So I'm saying this because this does follow the story of the play very well. But like you said, all those changes that they made do make sense in the grand scheme of things. Mm-hmm. It was thought up with not enough care, with the right amount of care that to have the story elevate. And on top of that, the movie itself is it's not just a CG green screen. It is built. It is a built movie.
And what I love about the built sets and the actual real world locations, it gives I think it was ILM who handled all the creature effects for this movie.
That makes sense, yeah.
All the character animation because when you see the stage show, the goat looks like a humanoid goat, which is because that's the way stage works. But then they said
you could have done that for the movie.
They could have, but they chose to go full almost realistic looking, I should say believable looking animals.
Yeah.
But they feel so believable and connected to this world. And I think had this all been a green screen movie, they probably wouldn't have had the time to really make these things work.
No, if anything, they would have almost blended in with the background to its detriment.
Yeah,
because you'd think, we're cutting corners, we're saving time. I was like, yeah, but you're also cutting quality quite a bit.
But it also means, and stuff where I'm pretty sure they were full on CG shots, like the Something Bad number.
Yes.
When it's just the animals. I guarantee you most of that set, even though they had built it for real, I guarantee you in the final product was probably built from the ground up just to make things easier to animate.
Yeah.
And they still kept Alice Brooks' cinematography so close. I'm pretty sure she had to have consulted to make sure it could be as accurate to what they were filming in real life.
Yeah.
I also later figured out, once we stopped recording, John M. Chu had the Apple Vision Pro. And so what he was able to do that was his monitor. So he could raise the screen up to the screen he wanted to, like it would be in a theater. Mm-hmm. And he was able to watch it and see it as it would be what people were going to see in the theater, on top of headphones that were going to allow the sound and everything. They were able to connect with people from all around the world, and he could draw within the environment and everyone could see this is what I'm wanting, which I think is so cool in a way to shoot this. I'm also so glad they shot both the movies back to back.
Yes.
So that way they can keep everything consistent. Mm-hmm. But not just talk about the cool technical achievements of this movie. You have
just amazing.
You have Cynthia Erivo, who is insane in this. I think she's an incredibly talented woman. And I should note that if people have heard the last podcast where I was talking about my nerves and red flags for this movie, well, I'm eating those words now. This was a phenomenal experience. And I'll say that some of my stuff was justified, but that's because I wasn't on set. I didn't have the full picture. And now that I have the full picture with the movie, I'm going, oh, wait, every decision you made makes sense. Mm-hmm. Which is why we should always give people the benefit of the doubt when it comes to what they're saying or doing.
Exactly. And yeah, I went in, I would say, with the right kind of cautious optimism, mainly because, I do love the play. I've seen it at least twice, and this was one of those cases where, thankfully, when I heard it was doing about as well as Moana 2, I was like, okay, so hopefully we are in good hands. And then I actually did hear some early reviews, but the ironic thing was they were all from people who weren't really big fans of musicals, so I didn't really think I would get... I was just like, let me guess, 1, 2, 3, they've all said that, look, if you're not into musicals, you're probably not going to get into this. And I'm like, well, I'm not the most musical person, but I still love Wicked. I still gave it a shot. Yeah, I really loved this movie. And performances, my big worry was, Ariana Grande. And that was, look, I'm eating up what my concerns now because she did a great job. In fact, to the point where I said she might even be freaking award worthy. Yeah.
I think with who just won the Golden Globe, I think Zoe Saldana is going to probably win for Emilia Perez.
Yeah.
But Grande, I think, is going to get nominated because she's so good as Glinda. Not just in her comedic scenes, which I had a feeling she was going to kill, but in all the dramatic scenes, the way she could, she really was vulnerable and showed what everything Glinda was going through was masterful. The one performance that I felt is not getting enough credit is Jeff Goldblum as the wizard. And I also believe Jeff Goldblum is a much better actor than most people give him credit for.
I'm not going to disagree with you, but let me just say, this is not me at all disagreeing with you when it comes to Goldblum in the movie, but when it comes to performances, I will say he was Jeff Goldbluming it, but in the right way.
Yeah. I'd say, I always point to a scene him in Thor Ragnarok, where he really sells it for me. Where he really sold it for me, it was like, sure, he's doing the Jeff Goldblum stuff of like, yeah, hi. Yeah. But then the second he sees Thor has the lightning and the look on his face of fear, and then he presses the button and the smirk he gives when it's that I've won. It makes me go, oh, this guy's a way better actor. And he does more of that here with Wicked. I think he is so good at taking every scenario that's around him and believably reacting to it. Yeah. And sure, he has a cadence in speech that, much like Walken, it's like, that's quirky. Yeah. But when he's in the right role, which is true for any actor, when he's in the right role, he really sells it.
And the Wizard is actually probably a spot-on role for him, if anything.
Oh, yeah. And there were a lot of people they were considering for this role. Steve Martin, Martin Short. There were...
Steve Martin and Martin Short, huh?
Oh, yeah. I think they were doing Only Murders in the Building at the time. But there was I think almost every actor in Hollywood was considered at one point for the Wizard. Yeah. But considered does not mean they were asked. I think Goldblum is the right choice. And when you see the production design by Nolan's usual production designer, Nathan Crowley, they have his face etched everywhere, subtly telling you the Wizard is here. And then when you actually see him, it's so well matched. And the other performance that is absolutely spot on is Michelle Yeoh.
Yeah, I was about to say Michelle Yeoh really, really crushes it as this really evil... I'm blanking on her character's name.
Madame Morrible.
Yeah, Madame Morrible, yeah. She just knocks it out of the park, just in terms of presence and how she quote unquote handles magic in the movie. I'm actually scared of this person now by the end of it.
I love Jonathan Bailey as Fiyero so much. He's very different from how he is in the stage show, where he's more of a jerk and more of this pretentious D-bag who is always I'm always in the right.
True.
Here, he definitely plays with the more relaxed, I'm dancing through life. But then he shows his complexities later on as we get closer. And it makes me excited for what we're going to see from him in the second one.
And this isn't really a criticism. This is more something, I don't know. I've seen the movie twice now, kind of like the play. I don't know if anyone else thought this, but when I heard him sing and heard him do some of his speaking as well, I don't know if this is me, but I heard a little Ewan McGregor in his voice.
It wouldn't surprise me that it has a lot of that charm that people that Obi-Wan probably would have had if he had left the Jedi Order and was with Sabine.
Yeah.
Bailey is a really talented actor. I think he actually also got a SAG nomination for Best Supporting Actor. Which surprised me because he hasn't been getting a lot of Best Supporting Actor nods, but the Screen Actors Guild, the people who judge the film acting, are saying he's one of the best of the year. It made me really stop and look back and go, oh yeah, because Ariana and Cynthia are absolutely bringing it.
They are,
But Jonathan Bailey really feels like a connecting piece that brings it all together. And I like Ethan Slater as Bach, and I'm excited to see a stage actor in SpongeBob doing really, really well for himself.
Mm.
But I will also say, Bach could have been played by virtually anybody, and I think he does a good job. We just haven't gotten to see what he's going to do in because in Act 2, he does a lot more.
We're not going to say specifically what happens, but there was a gesture that Glinda does with Bach in the movie involving putting something where his heart was, and when I saw that moment, I was like, oh...
Yeah, the foreshadowing, if you've seen the show, you're catching it in the first one, you're like, oh, this is gonna hurt.
Yeah.
And then I also really love Marissa Bode as Nessa.
Yes.
Like, I know many people talk about Nessa. I really think just the way she carries herself, she makes her instantly likable. And what we know happens in Act 2 is going to make it worse.
But the thing is, the actress does, I don't remember specifically her condition, but she is actually in a wheelchair, so without going into too much spoilers... What are they going to do with her in Act 2, I wonder?
I think with what we've seen, I have some thoughts of how they're going to pull it off, but I'm going to wait till the movie comes out so we can see that. But of course, the real winner here is John M. Chu and the way he brought his incredibly talented team together.
Exactly.
And bringing back a lot of the people who made In the Heights. Alice Brooks did the cinematography again. The way his editor, Myron Kirsten, really, really, really sold it. Who also edited Tick, Tick, Boom, In the Heights, and Crazy Rich Asians.
Interesting.
So clearly, Myron Kirsten is a very talented editor.
Exactly.
And I think this is going to be a really interesting. I'm excited for Wicked Part 2. I know they're calling it Wicked for Good, but for the sake of consistency, can we please call it? Can we please call it Wicked Part 2, not Wicked for Good?
I get that.
Because you've already called it Wicked Part 1. Please just call it Wicked Part 2.
Exactly.
There's nothing wrong with that.
Last minute changes.
But I will say, the other film that I thought that is the grandfather of all science fiction and for years said was unfilmable, and they finally got to do it. It was my second favorite movie of the year, and I think... Oh, wait. We forgot to talk about your theory.
It's all right. But I was gonna like pop in real quick. I was like, well, before we get into seconds, my third favorite movie of the year was Late Night with the Devil, which was a horror movie that is. I'm not gonna say it's found footage, but it can be very loosely seen as found footage because what this story is this man. He's a very fictional talk show host. Like he's like in the ratings behind like people like David Letterman. It's kind of like what Quentin Tarantino did with. Leonardo DiCaprio in Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. He made this famous like actor of that era who's like somewhat washed up at the same time. This is kind of what they're doing, except the horror version of that. And what this guy does is, because he's fallen behind the ratings, he takes a trip around the world and then he comes back and then he starts a whole talk show on Halloween that involves talking to the dead and the underworld. And the whole time you're wondering, okay, is this all fake? Is this real? Eventually, yes, you start to realize when things become real. However, it's just the way everything is executed. I think I said this in our last recording. The way it's like watching the televised version of what probably people would have thought or reacted to with War of the Worlds, like when that aired on a radio station back then and people actually thought the world was being invaded by aliens. Yeah, I got the feeling I was actually watching an old special from the 70s that actually happened with all this supernatural like stuff going on across the screen. And David Dastmalchian does such a great job playing it cool as this host while he's like not falling apart behind the camera, but he's just trying to keep himself behind the camera because everything is like this is the night that's either gonna make or break him. It's one of those movies where he just pushes and pushes the limit on what he should be doing. And I don't want to spoil too much, but give this movie a look. I had a lot of horror movies I saw this year. Nosferatu I actually saw just recently, which we'll talk about some other time. But the two directors on this, Cameron and Colin Carnes, this is like somewhat of a debut for them because all their other films have been like TV movies and everything. And the camera work done by, let me just bring that person up, Matthew Temple, like very basic and simple, but what they have you watching is just so gripping, and it's in an entertaining way. Again, like if you were watching something that's like a time capsule, but not really.
Yeah, everything I heard about this movie is intriguing. I mean, you're having a little girl literally play the devil,
Yes.
and that there are so many ways you could go with that. This was one I might check out with all the lights turned on in the middle of the day with all the windows open.
If you need to.
But I've heard a lot of just great things. I'm a huge fan of David Dastmalchian. I think
Oh,
he
yeah.
is an insanely talented
He's
actor.
very talented. I wish he was going to be back. Hopefully he comes back to James Gunn's DC universe, but yeah.
Oh yeah, I think he could appear. He's DC's secret weapon, as they like to call him, and he's appeared in pretty much since The Dark Knight has been with DC.
Yeah.
So I have a feeling he's going to be really, 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 really integral to that universe. But I'm a fan of when horror movies can play with that kind of style.
It's like, in some ways, I want to say this is probably would have been like what it felt like when Blair Witch came out, because I'm going to be honest, I'm one of those weirdos who didn't actually really get into the Blair Witch movie. And the reason why is not because it was shaky cam. I was like, no, that's like the third, maybe second reason why I didn't get into it. The first reason was because there's really not much to look at. And when I say that, I do mean like they don't show you too much. And when it's nighttime, you can't really see much. And so people have I've come across a lot of folks who are like, it's all about what you don't see, man. Yeah, it's all about what you don't see. It's like the Jaws effect. I was like, look, I've seen Jaws. I've seen the Jaws effect. I've seen it done so brilliantly. I have also seen it done, unfortunately, terribly more so than I do in a good manner, because, yeah. That's just what the Blair Witch was.
Yeah, the Jaws effect, whenever I hear that, it's like, okay, but is the director who's using the Jaws effect on the same level as Steven Spielberg?
Yeah, exactly. So, and that's the thing. I don't think, for one, Blair Witch, it's not so much a matter of failing at the Jaws effect. It's just, maybe at the time I could see it probably scaring and giving the shivers to a lot of people, but when I look at it,
because when it came
today,
out, they were treating it like it was real. Like, this is a real thing that went down. It was only a couple months later that they revealed, nope, this was a fake fictional movie.
Yeah.
And I think that's cool for the marketing, and definitely, I think Blair Witch has that novelty to it that's really, really cool. And I still think the monologue that Heather gives closer to the end of the film, where she says, I'm scared to close my eyes and I'm scared to open them. One, that's an iconic image for a reason, but knowing that was all improvised and it was just all in the moment, Heather Donahue, her performance is insane. And for me, that's the scariest part of the movie, because it's just this subtle sound of, what was that? And just talking about the fear of existing in this place. And I think that is the one moment of Blair Witch where I truly felt terrified.
Yeah.
Everything else for Blair Witch just bored me.
Yeah.
Because you really just spend a lot of time, we're in the woods, we're doing this now, we're doing this.
That's where the magic of this movie comes in. Because it's more like a TV show, they have to throw a lot at you. And I don't mean that in a bad way. They have to throw what they can, because this is coming from a side of someone who has to throw in everything he has to, because his whole career's on the line. So therefore, it's a little more interesting to see him like, oh, I'm going to keep doing this when he probably shouldn't. It's like, I don't need this guy on board. And it's not that he should keep these people. It's just he's biting off a whole lot more than he can chew. And this is in the 70s, when there's not a whole lot of technology or anything, or any kind of advanced technology, if you even want to call it that, to help him examine the situation. No, he's just doing this out of pure, greed, to say the least.
Yeah.
But all in all, is in terms of just, I guess, analog filmmaking, where you've got, one set of camera and then another camera that's more like something like in real life. It was... It is, give it a look. Don't get the idea that it's just found footage all over again. No. This was a really, really interesting experiment.
Yeah, I think horror is in this interesting place where people are having fun trying to experiment with it.
That's the best thing about
I think
horror,
it can, some of the things that's like, I don't want to call them like gimmicks, but like experimental stuff that figures out works then gets overused. Like YouTube, has a bunch of analog horror.
Yes.
And at first, it's intriguing, it was creepy, it was cool, but now it's just, oh, hey, here's a creepy image with like the stretched out face that looks kind of freaky. Oh, hey, this is doing this. Oh, there's an ARG you've got to follow.
Yeah.
And Late Night with the Devil, they did another approach to analog horror, which, as you said, was, what if it was like a 70s late night special?
Exactly.
And you're getting this intriguing story around this fictional universe. It almost kind of reminds me like it's the horror... more obvious horror than Network was. Because Network was about a fictional news reporter and host of news stations.
Yeah.
And the movie literally opens with him surrounded by actual news stations of the time.
Oh.
And I could talk talk a lot about Network, but I won't get into that. But I'll say that movie really is brilliant, and unfortunately, we're living in the universe that movie warned about.
Yeah.
But Late Night with the Devil is very similar because hearing the story about messing with the paranormal, I don't know if you're familiar with the YouTubers Sam and Colby.
No, I'm not actually.
They do a lot of paranormal investigations, and they have for years, and they're very, very good about figuring it out.
Okay.
But recently, they released a video where one of them almost took it too far, and they had this very candid conversation in front of the camera about how going too far was, and they've actually have announced it's why they're switching the way they're making their content on their channel.
Oh man!
But when we're talking about Late Night with the Devil, I just couldn't help but flash back to what was going on with the Sam and Colby situation.
Okay.
Because we are seeing people who are messing with supernatural and things that we don't fully understand and know.
Yeah, and if so, like, okay, maybe I don't believe in curses, or let alone just what the kind of curses you see in horror movies. I mean, I don't particularly believe in that kind of stuff. However, I do think you shouldn't be messing with that stuff, because there are people out there who I'm not going to say dumb, but are very ignorant, I could say, when it comes to that stuff. And I don't mean that in a bad way. It's like, no, there are some people who really don't react well to this kind of like practice. So,
and I mean, we see that with spiritual and supernatural things, and we see that even with science. Like, we keep hearing about scientists who are like, oh, we can bring this creature back from extinction, and we're like, Jurassic Park.
Yeah.
And so I'm glad that Late Night with the Devil is existing, because it's telling you really shouldn't mess with the stuff even in your most desperate hour. There are some things you cannot and should not do.
But because it's a horror movie and it takes place on a Halloween night, it just throws in such all the right kind of experimentation vibes. That's a Halloween movie, that it's also pretending to be a Halloween special, because yes, we all watch a horror movie or two during the month of Halloween, but I was like, yeah, but I also do miss those awesome Halloween specials growing up.
Oh,
even from whatever kid show I was watching. Hell, even some, like, you could make a Goosebumps, that 90s show might as well have been nothing but Halloween specials all around. Yeah.
Oh yeah. I know Disney has been experimenting with those with Disney Plus. Like, Agatha all along, as it was coming out, felt very much like it was supposed to be a Halloween special. And my brother and I fully embraced it. We would turn off the lights and light candles while we were watching it.
Oh, nice.
And that was fun. And I like those Mickey Mouse cartoons, like I showed you one of them. Mm-hmm. They did a whole 30-minute Halloween special that was very funny, but also gets a little creepy. And it was nice to see Mickey and friends can do a little creepy.
There you go.
And that's what I think is fun about stuff like Late Night with the Devil, really getting to experiment and try new things out. And if I remember correctly, it got a limited release in theaters, but it was more a streaming release.
No, actually, no, you're right. It did get a limited release in theaters, because I saw this at the Alamo Drafthouse, which, if you're from Texas, this theater pretty much gets all the good stuff in terms of like what they premiere. Mm-hmm. Like, if there's an art house movie, a horror movie, of course, that's an art house movie that's coming out around like whatever month, and you don't live near it. Yeah. For us who live in Texas, all we have to do is live near a draft house, which is, eating. Okay, so I guess to answer your question, the movie did get a limited release, I guess, through Alamo Drafthouse, and I can imagine maybe a couple other theaters too, because it's funny, because there's another movie, which we may get to in a different segment. It's getting a release next week, but not through Drafthouse, but it's very limited. It's from the 13th to the 15th, but... with this movie, I guess technically it came out actually in 2023 through, I want to say Sundance, if I had to guess, but it didn't get a more wide release until 2024, like February of that month.
Yeah, because it feels like this movie, when I hear it, is perfect for something like streaming, where if you're alone at home watching this movie,
you know what?
There's more like you're watching the special live.
Yeah, I was gonna say it is weird to say this movie would be better, I guess, if you're watching it in the comfort of your own home, because, well, for one, if you don't do well with horror movies, you can pause whenever you want to. But two, you're right. As you were saying, that's the experience of thinking you're watching this actual thing. Maybe not even watching, you're streaming something that actually happened that was very horrible. But then, remember, no, this is just a movie. Mm-hmm. This is just how good this is.
Yeah, it's very much, that's where I like what experimentation can do, and I think it's really, really cool to see that films like this keep going. And then I also have hope for franchise films now, especially after, I think you and I both have the same number 2 of the year.
We do, yeah. It's Dune Part 2.
Dune Part 2. Everything about this movie is great. They took everything that was great about the first one and amplified it. And it's the cinematography is somehow better.
Greek
the
Fraser.
acting is somehow better. The writing is somehow even better. The action is better. Everything about this. And the first movie was great at it.
Yeah.
So this movie just elevated it to a new level. And this movie's budget was also pretty high. It was over $200 million.
I could imagine, yeah.
And apparently it actually caused some issues for other studios who called in all their producers and said, so we're giving you the same budgets. Why does Doom Part 2 look like this and our movies look like this?
Oh, man.
But it gives me hope for what future franchise stuff is going to be. Because, well, with the release of the series, and we know they're doing a third Dune, this is a franchise now. But I don't mind it if it keeps looking and sounding this good.
Yeah.
And that's how I want. And I don't mind franchise stuff when it looks as gorgeous like as it does. Actually, I was talking about this with my brother because we saw what Harry Potter looked like, what some of the Star Wars films would look like. And while I love the Marvel films, you know I love them, I think their basic approach in the way they've color graded and shot some of the stuff isn't kind of have given us that weird overly lit style that we're so used to now.
Overly lit, and then you also notice that it is potentially green screen, so then you're like questioning, as I probably said earlier, why does that feel like it's up against a flat surface?
And that's what makes, and what looking back at old franchise stuff like Harry Potter and Star Wars and a lot of stuff, they really let sometimes things not be well lit. It's like you had a lot of shadow work, you had a lot of interesting color palettes per movie, and I think that's the thing that I and even Marvel's starting to move away from it. Look at how they shot Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness. They really, really experimented with darker shadows, with more interesting cinematography. And the Marvels even did that very well.
Didn't see that one, but I'll take your word for it.
Oh, I would highly recommend it. The Marvels was fun. But with Doom Part 2, it feels like Denis Villeneuve brought it back to what we liked about these franchise movies in the first place. One, everything about it, like the gorgeous world building, everything about this cool action set pieces, all centers around a great story.
Yeah.
This story is, carrying from the first movie, you're going to the second, and you're watching by all accounts, a very...
epic, for one.
It's an epic, but you're following the character of Paul, who is the definition of protagonist. Like, I love Paul. He is the definition of protagonist, but that works because slowly but surely he's falling from what a protagonist would be. He's following all the same beats of the hero's journey, but mentally, he's losing himself, and he's losing himself to who he believes he should be, which is the Messiah of this planet of Arrakis, when in reality, and we know he's not the Messiah. We know that his mother jumped the gun when conceiving him. We know that. And she is, Rebecca Ferguson does a phenomenal job manipulating him and everyone else around them into believing he is this messiah figure to the point that he believes it. And it's why Dune Messiah itself is going to be shocking, because he's going to figure out he's not.
He was never the chosen one, which, there you go, y'all. There's your chosen one story, essentially. Not done right, but done with enough layers behind it.
It's why it brought me back actually to where I see what honestly watching this brought me back to what I think Lucas was trying to do with Anakin and Star Wars.
That's very much what I thought too. But where it comes to Anakin, I'm not going to say it's a bad approach, at least when you've got Clone Wars in mind. But when you take that out of the equation with the movies, you get what you're trying to do, but this wasn't very well executed.
Yeah, it felt like we missed some steps to
and
get
again,
there.
The TV series does emphasize that emptiness, but we're looking at the movies here. Yeah.
And I think what is so brilliant about this story, one, it's taking what Frank Herbert did so brilliantly, which was already taking a trope that was well known, the hero's journey, but then flipping on his head by he's going to follow the same beats, but you're not going to like him in the end.
Yeah.
And what I also love is that he gave more power to Zendaya's character, Chani, who in the book is very similar, but at the end of the story, she becomes his concubine while he marries the
Princess
Emperor.
Aurelian.
Yeah, where he marries Princess Aurelian. Here, they don't do that. No. She leaves him. Chani leaves him, and that is, I think, is a great change because it emphasizes more of what Herbert was saying and the people that Paul has hurt. The way I remember, I saw this in IMAX in Tennessee with my sister, and it was a great experience. Yeah. But the way that when Paul at the end of the story said, when they ask him, do you want to surrender and stay on the planet Arrakis, or do you want us to go to the stars and spread your message? And he says, let's go to the stars. I could feel the audience is just, I felt everybody just let out a breath of heartbreak. Like, no.
Yeah.
And it's a shockingly sad ending for a movie that you think, where the first movie ends down but hopeful.
Yeah.
This movie takes that hope and just further brings it down.
Mm-hmm.
And it makes you feel that hope, and you get great sequences like the worm riding
stuff,
sequence.
yeah, there's the
you have
battle
Austin
sequences.
Butler being absolutely horrifying as Feyd-Rautha,
Then you've got
just killing everybody.
His intro like battle when that black and white scene scenario where he's in the Coliseum, that was amazing. I loved the color palettes in this movie, like the different contrasts. Yeah, you had the black and white obvious one, which looked amazing. Then you had a fight on a mountain, or like, yeah, Rocky Mountain, where you've got the orange rocks, but the characters are all in black against like a really bright orange backdrop. It was so beautiful.
It was gorgeous looking, and we were talking about what they did with Wicked a little bit. It feels like anything that was a fully CG shot really felt like it was trying to capture what Greg Fraser as cinematographer would do. And I can tell that Denis Villeneuve loves doing this type of stuff. And it's funny, we're talking about Star Wars and comparing it there, because he actually didn't like Star Wars after Return of the Jedi. He actually doesn't like Return of the Jedi, which he says this one feels more like the Star Wars for adults, and I can see that because they're really letting you sit with this, with the sinking feeling of people are genuinely manipulating everyone around him. And and sure, we see that in Star Wars, but it's more about the spectacle, which is perfect for Star Wars.
Yeah, Star Wars
can get away
with that.
And I think Andor, as much as I love Andor and its dialogue, it's all centered around the spectacles that are coming in later episodes.
Yeah.
Here, any spectacle is all character oriented, and it's meant to be. And the best way I can describe it, Andor's spectacle is being built up by the characters and their story, and it's still palpable, and it's great. Dune, the spectacle is also just as much part of the story as a quiet moment.
Yeah,
and both are great. I really want to emphasize that. It's just different ways to tell stories.
Yeah, case in point, like, again, the worm riding. Yeah, that is an integral part because it's something that's gonna, well, helps him become one with the people in some capacity. It's not like
it also fulfills the prophecy.
Yeah.
It's fulfilling the prophecy that he would ride the sandworm, and it's fulfilling all this stuff that he has to do. And it's making it an incredible moment for Paul's journey.
Yes.
It feels very organic or flowing. It feels very organic to the story that they're telling. And that just comes from a phenomenal script.
An amazing script that just has every, not twist and turn, but has all the right build up and all the right places. There was even a change from the book, without going too much into spoilers. Paul eventually has a younger sister in the book, at the very least. And I'm not going to lie, in the book, what they did with her, where she's like 2 years old, but has the literacy of an adult, I couldn't believe that even when I was reading the book, a science fiction book, no less. And even when the David Lynch movie, granted they didn't get a 2-year-old, they probably got a 5-year-old, it still didn't work out very well.
One of the co-writers of this movie is John Spietz.
Yeah.
He wrote Prometheus, Passengers, and Doctor Strange.
Huh.
And he also wrote this film. So I think it's, and I love those movies, so I'm not saying they're bad at all.
Yeah.
He also wrote The Darkest Hour. He also, it's incredible to see what different screenwriters can do. It's kind of like when, as much as I like those movies, none of them are like this Oscar-worthy script that like Dune Part 2 was with Villeneuve.
Yeah.
And it kind of reminds me of one of the writers on Top Gun Maverick. Was one of the writers on like a lot of the Transformers movies.
That's right, yeah.
So it's always one of those, you don't know how talented someone is until you give them a massive chance like this. And I think, and again, the screenplay is just so brilliant. And for me personally, I don't know how this would be for anyone else. If someone happened to not see Part 1, I feel like they could follow Part 2 pretty decently if they just let it flow. I don't know if it would work as well. But I think they would be complete. But I think they would catch on pretty well.
I don't know if I agree on that statement. I actually am in the opposite. Well, not the opposite specifically, but I mean, like with Wicked, I actually, funny enough, with Part 1, I feel like I got everything I needed, and I don't need Part 2, even though there are some plot threads that need to be fulfilled in part 2 in order for this to feel complete. But like I said, I don't feel like I need to go to part 2. With Dune parts 1 and 2, I feel like I would actually pretty much need both.
That's fair.
Because they're really
it's
huge.
one complete story.
They're really huge stories, like in scale and what's going on, and just not in messages, but just like overall, like you said, storytelling and hero's journey, and just the twists and turns of like what people are given in terms of like what they learn about themselves and what they learn more about through lore and everything, like the audience should. Yeah.
I think, Dune Part 2 is just an incredible film, and I also know that like Villeneuve with this budget probably had to really collaborate with the studio to get certain things done. And if this is how, and I really hope that this is how they continue to collaborate, because it really, really works.
It's kind of like the Nolan and the Warner Brothers studio collab.
Yeah, back when that worked, and now he's with Universal,
Yeah,
and we'll talk more about that, I think, later on. But I think Villeneuve is doing some really, really great stuff now. I think he is going to tell a really great story. I hope Doom Messiah, when they do Doom Part 3, is going to be really awesome. So, overall, every franchise movie, and that includes my beloved MCU, please take notes. I think they did take notes, because just from how we've seen from the Superman trailer and what that's going to look like, it really feels like if this movie shifted to, let's shoot these well with the budgets we have, please make movies look cool again.
Yeah, exactly.
And then we finally get into our number one. I think you and I also have the same one.
We do have the same one.
And animation, I love it. I just recently saw like Wallace and Gromit, Vengeance Most Foul, which I loved. And Inside Out 2 was absolutely spectacular. But the one movie that I just think overall was just better, one of the best stories I've seen this year and told in just such a brilliant way, was The Wild Robot.
The Wild Robot really caught us off guard.
For me, it's fun to say this is the best of DreamWorks. I think this is what DreamWorks does so well, but it also captured the feeling of what Pixar does, and it even captured what Ghibli does so well.
Yeah, it's just this story of, well, without going too much into spoilers, this is the story of a robot that crash lands on, not an island, but crash lands in the forest, and essentially has to evolve and grow up in the wild, and stumbles upon a little gosling and has to raise it. Now, on the paper, yes, doesn't sound like much.
It's this most simple story that you can do.
Yeah, and it is just
phenomenal. Executed.
Yeah, it is. I can't really talk about it enough without giving it any credit, because talking about it really doesn't give it enough credit.
One of the best things that comes from this is director Chris Sanders' direction and screenplay.
Yes.
And you can tell from the moment, from just the first few seconds of this film, from the first 15 seconds, you can tell, oh, he knows exactly what he's doing.
And Chris Sanders, who we all probably know as Stitch from Lilo and Stitch, he's also the director of Lilo and Stitch. He also directed How to Train Your Dragon.
The Croods he directed.
Croods, yeah.
And he even directed that Harrison Ford dog movie, that live-action dog movie he did.
Oh, yeah. Into the Wild, I believe.
Yeah, I think, or Call of the Wild.
Call of the Wild, yeah.
Yeah, and it's interesting to see all the steps he's taken, but it feels like everything he's done has led to The Wild Robot. Mm-hmm. And really, it's a phenomenal story, and the character of Roz, who is the robot,
yeah.
The animation on her is spectacular, and the way that the animators convey so much emotion through just her movements is insane. Mm-hmm. But then giving her the voice and heart and soul is one of the strongest performances of the year with Lupita Nyong'o.
Yeah, I couldn't even I mean, it's not that I would have recognized her voice in a minute like that, but damn, I was like, I would not have guessed that was her. And there's a lot of other great performances from Pedro Pascal as the fox. Even a performance I'm shocked I didn't notice in the movie, Mark Hamill.
Yeah, he plays a bear, and he doesn't have a lot of screen time, but what he does do with that bear is so impressive.
And we've also got Catherine O'Hara as a possum. And
having one of the funnious scenes in the movie, too.
Yeah, and then this actor who is really just freaking Bill Nye, who is Bill Nyeing it up as this goose.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
But then you also have Ving Rhames in there as an eagle,
yeah.
And it's also great. The entire cast is magnificent. The other thing is the animation style goes for this painterly style.
Like a storybook painter style that's like in this laid back kind of universe where, okay, there is technically a big finale, which I'm not going to criticize the movie against. It's just one of those things.
It felt very organic.
It felt organic enough, but it also felt like it feels, let's write a story that has an ending that's organic in the sense that we need some action, I guess, to happen. That feels like that's the studio note there. We need just a little more action in this, but
And
that's not,
honestly,
it's not bad.
it works.
It works.
It's kind of reminding me actually of Kiki. It's gonna sound weird comparison, but Kiki's Delivery Service, is very laid back throughout, and then it has this big sequence at the end.
Totoro does something similar, but the sequence isn't huge. It's more like a dramatic moment. That's happening. Yeah,
and that's what I felt. That's actually a great point you pointed out, since this movie was inspired by My Neighbor Totoro.
Yeah,
which you're actually wearing the sweatshirt today.
I'm wearing a sweatshirt for Totoro, one of my all-time favorite Ghibli movie. If Spirit Away was never made, I guess.
Yeah, I could talk about Ghibli. We'll have to talk about that at some point.
Oh yeah,
but what I love is that final action sequence is also an emotional climax as well, and the way it ends is so brilliant. And the other thing that makes this movie just so palpable and emotional is Chris Bauer's score.
Yes.
Chris Bowers is somebody I actually haven't heard. Like, of course, his score for King Richard he's done a lot of great serviceable scores.
Yeah, of course.
But this is the first one where I'm like, I want this guy on every project now and let him go with it.
He brought me back almost to the years of Don Bluth when he was directing Jerry Goldsmith's music or Jamie Horner's music. Or is it Jamie or it's James Horner?
Yeah, James Horner. I think what's so great is watching some of the behind-the-scenes stuff. You can tell Chris Sanders and Chris Bowers were really great collaborators.
Yeah.
He had written the migration sequence, and he had said, Chris Bowers had just had his daughter, and Sanders' direction to the score for migration was, this score needs to be you're sending your child off to college. And he wrote this piece, and he said it was getting to this great climax, and then dialogue came in, so the music softened up. And he said, you know what? Chris, we just want you to write the music. We will storyboard and animate to your music. And that's an example of great collaboration of when what Sanders saw is the story needs this to work. And this is the moment that we pull back.
We need to somewhat also accommodate for those who are working with us and everything. It's just
Chris Bowers also said that he actively went out of his way to avoid any specific influences, so people weren't going to be like, oh, this is a cult representing this culture. Bowers wanted to bring something that all cultures could connect to and relate to.
It's like he gave each animal a different, kind of music piece, essentially, which is a great idea. I mean, animals are all different from one another.
Yeah.
So.
This movie is brilliant. Now, interestingly, this is also a great year for animation, because I will say if Inside Out 2 ends up winning a lot of the Best Animated Feature awards, I won't be upset.
I won't either.
Because it really, really caught something, and it caught kids with emotionally. Like, I've talked with my friends who have kids.
Yeah.
And they've said that after Inside Out and Inside Out 2, their kids are more communicating how they feel using the movie.
Yeah, and what they did with the movie in terms of, not communication, but how the brain became a little more evolved, what they did was actually really cool.
And that movie also has a phenomenal score.
Yeah.
But interestingly, at the Golden Globes, they both lost to an indie film called Flow, which is about this cat and other animals that are just trying to survive in a post-apocalyptic world, but it's very soft and laid back, all animated in Blender. And that won the Best Animated Feature Award at the Golden Globes against The Wild Robot and Inside Out 2.
So you beat Disney and DreamWorks.
And so, and Flow apparently is also silent animated.
Oh, of course.
It's a silent animated film. And so I'm excited because, Moana 2, I know, was serviceable to a lot of people.
I haven't seen Moana 2.
But Pixar came back with Inside Out 2 and said, no, we're still here. We're still in the game. DreamWorks came back and said, hey, you guys like Puss in Boots: The Last Wish, right? Watch this. Yeah. And then exploded our brains. And then independent animation studios are going, we're trying this too.
And then you've got
And Sony is doing great with Spider-Verse and Mitchell's versus the Machines and The Bad Guys.
Yeah.
I'm glad that we're in this new period of animation where we're taking the gorgeous work of computer animation and saying, okay, we tried making it realistic.
Yeah.
What else can we do with this medium?
I guess on top of the other honorable mentions in terms of animation, I'm trying to think real hard. Oh yeah, I saw Transformers 1 not too long ago, and Transformers has always been that franchise where it's I don't know how else to describe it. It's kind of I guess as a teenager growing up with that franchise, it was almost like the imperfect significant other. You got the first movie that's got some imperfections, but you're willing to look past all that with the sequel, which has more imperfections. Then the third movie comes out and actually has, I'm not going to lie, the third movie is actually a little better than I think people give it credit for. And it's like, okay, there's some of the more of the good stuff. And then the rest of the movies, with the exception of Bumblebee and even Rise of the Beasts, but I guess that leaves 4 and 5. Those movies just like, yeah.
We're not fun.
They weren't fun. Bumblebee was fine for what it was, and Rise of the Beast was all right too, but Transformers 1 was very epic, like in all the right ways. It didn't take itself, it took itself seriously in the sense that it knows what it is, but it's not going to like make you think like it's going any deeper than what it is.
Yeah,
also.
I saw that the Annie Awards that, who played Megatron, I'm trying to remember.
Oh, Michael Tyree Henry. He played Megatron, yeah.
Yeah, he got an Annie nomination for Best Voiceover Performance for his role as Megatron.
Yes, and Chris Hemsworth as Optimus, he was, yeah, I mean, if I'm being honest, if y'all weren't exactly with Chris Hemsworth, I almost said Chris Sanders. If you weren't with Chris Hemsworth's performance after Thor: Love and Thunder, then other movies that came out personally, like this one and Furiosa, those have all not reminded, but they all actually tell you, no, he can do goofy and he can do crazy in all the best ways.
Yeah, I think what I will say for Hemsworth is, I think we wanted him to be funny because we were surprised by it in Ragnarok because they had treated Thor so seriously, and it was more of that fish out of water scenario where the comedy came from.
Yeah.
But they showed, no, this guy can be naturally funny. And then, as much as I like the way that Thor: Love and Thunder is shot for the most part, it relied too much on the comedy.
That was the biggest problem for me, yeah.
Which is a shame because I am a Taika Waititi fan, but I was like, and his whole big thing is if something is full on dramatic, you got to add humor in there to really sell it. And I mean, you see something like Jojo Rabbit where he clearly understood it. I don't think he nailed the balance with Thor: Love and Thunder.
No, I don't think so either. But
I think that it can come back. Actually, speaking of Furiosa, did you hear who's being rumored for Thor 5?
Anya Taylor-Joy?
George Miller.
Oh, okay. That actually makes sense.
They apparently really want George Miller to do the fifth Thor movie after he worked with Hemsworth on Furiosa.
Well, because I know they got along very well. I remember seeing those reports. And if we are going to talk about underrated movies, then yeah, Furiosa, that's my underrated movie of the year. Because
I might watch that tonight if I have some chance. Yeah, if I have a chance.
If, I know Mad Max and Fury Road wasn't like a box office smash hit or anything, but it also
Six Academy Award wins.
Yeah, 6 Academy Award wins. Yeah, that's what it took home. So clearly there was something there. And yes, there is something there, and it's still there even in Furiosa, which is this bizarre world that looks like it's very much from our world, but we get a little and not enough background at the same time in all the best ways. And in this movie, we're also seeing more of not just the Green Village, but we also see Gastown and the Bullet Farm. So we're actually seeing more of like how like this citadel or this syndicate, I should probably say, has spread out. And every single frame of action and just whatever's being talked about, it's a very simple story because it's a revenge story for one. And it's also I don't know how else to say this, but Furiosa, let alone Anya Taylor-Joy, she shouldn't be Peach anymore. She should be Zelda. I'm just going to say that. She's like a quiet version of like Zelda in this game, which a lot of people could say like there probably has been before, but I haven't played that game yet. But she is so brutal in the movie. She doesn't go down without a fight. And yeah, Anya Taylor-Joy was very much the character that Charlize Theron was. And on top of other things, Hemsworth has this really scary and hilarious performance as Dementus, who's the main villain. And he has a really horrible scene. I'm telling you this just to let you know. There's a scene where he has Immortan Joe's brother in what I can only describe as a saw trap. And you're going to clench yourself.
Oh.
Yeah, you're going to clench yourself in a few areas.
Oh, man.
Yeah.
If we're talking most underrated movies of the year, for me, the most underrated, because it got destroyed by critics, it was hated, and yet when I finally sat down to watch it, I had some of the most fun I've had in a while, and that was Red One, Dwayne Johnson's Christmas movie. And man, I was not looking forward to this because my family decided to have us sit down and watch it for Christmas because my parents had seen it. and they're like, you know what, we're gonna watch this as a family on Christmas Eve. And I did not have the highest expectations for this movie. It did everything. I was nervous that it wasn't gonna be very good, and I think because my expectations were so low, I ended up adoring this movie, and I probably will watch it every Christmas.
Well, at least you gave it, I mean, not gave it its audience, but at least you gave it support because, man, the whole movie, from what I've been seeing, and I haven't seen it, so I'm not going to pass judgment on what I think of it at all, but I have not been hearing the best things.
And I will say, I don't know what everyone was smoking, because people were mad that it plays with Christmas tropes. You're mad that a Christmas movie plays with Christmas tropes?
That's a little bit of a weird criticism, I'm not going to lie.
And then they were criticizing that Dwayne Johnson and Chris Evans play exactly their casting types. Okay, and?
It's an action movie.
It's an action Christmas movie, and why are you mad that Dwayne Johnson and Chris Evans are playing their types?
Yeah.
That was incredibly annoying, and I will say that, yes, $250 million, I will say, not in terms of cinematography, but in terms of the effects and who they have in the film and what they do with them, you can see the budget on the screen. I would have maybe liked a lot stronger cinematography for the film, maybe is my biggest criticism.
There you go.
But there are some fun action sequences in this movie. There are some really clever moments, there's some really silly ways they go about it, and solutions where you're like, how do they do this? And then it's so simple that you're like, how did I not see that coming?
There you go, yeah.
But then they also have a great emotional through line, especially for Dwayne Johnson's character, who's the head bodyguard of Santa.
Yeah.
And J.K. Simmons as Jack Santa Claus is already funny, but the reason they give for it is so smart and so clever that you're like, that it actually answers the question, how does Santa do this all in one night? And the way they do it is so clever and so brilliant, but it's also so funny that you're like, how come no one else has done this yet?
Okay.
But for Dwayne Johnson's character, he really and sure, I do just see Dwayne Johnson, but the way he doesn't overplay anything, the way that he can just look at something, and the way the editing goes around his performance, it's so smart and clever, and you genuinely believe that he cares for this holiday and cares for Santa,
yeah.
But he feels as though he can't be doing it because he's lost the heart and soul of what makes Christmas work. Now, sure, we've heard that story before, but for a character whose whole job is Christmas and protecting the guy who runs Christmas, and he no longer feels the magic, there's and it's been going on for him for thousands of years.
Okay.
That's a genuinely great question. Chris Evans' character, of course, he's a pickpocket, he's a criminal, but then he has this son that he's been neglecting as a dad. And the scenario, and they make it believable. Sure, I've seen it before, but they play it so believably and wonderfully, and the things they do with it are genuinely, like, there are moments that make your heart drop into your stomach with what they're about to do.
Okay.
The main villain is also really fun. She is incredibly terrifying.
And who's the villain?
And her motivation, she's a Christmas witch.
Oh, okay.
Who is, she was formerly the lover of Krampus, who in this movie, first of all, his design is pure makeup. Like, people talk about all the CG effects in this movie. There is one practical effect, and it's this makeup design creature of Krampus, played by a well-respected German actor. And he's Santa's brother in this movie. And his former love is this Christmas witch, because their whole thing is about punishing the naughty children on Christmas.
Yeah.
But they decide to stop as the world is changing, but this time she wants to take it even further to punish the people who are naughty.
Oh boy.
And it's such, and it honestly, it makes you question about good and evil and how that should be handled and how it should be, who should be punished and who should not.
Okay.
It's genuinely a very fun movie, and I highly recommend, if you have a Christmas movie you guys want to watch, give Red One a watch. It's on Amazon Prime. It's very, very well done. I think it's very creative.
Yeah.
It's from Jake Kasdan, who directed the last two Jumanji movies.
Yeah.
And I think he brought the same level of creativity. He brought the same level of heart to it. Mm-hmm. And there is a genuine reason for some of the things that you're just like, it's so simple but so clever. Honestly, to say it's so simple and so clever, it's kind of like how Home Alone's traps and everything, you know, they're so simple, but they're so clever that they're so creative.
Yeah.
That's what they do here, and it's so beautifully and wonderfully made.
Okay. So in terms of honorable mentions this year, so I saw quite a bunch of horror movies. Well, not a bunch. I saw quite a few. There we go. And because this was a good year for horror movies, like Nosferatu, I really enjoyed. I will say this, I don't want to give away too much about the movie, but I really enjoyed it, but I can't say I was really scared of it.
Mm-hmm.
It's a weird thing to say, but I'd still give it a watch. I saw it at Alamo Drafthouse on 35 millimeter film.
Oh.
So yeah, seeing a gothic on 35 millimeter with some of the film grain in there, that actually made the experience very well, and I would do it all over again, even if I wasn't scared of the movie personally.
Mm-hmm.
Then other movies I saw, The First Omen, which was a prequel to the Omen that came out back in the 70s, which was technically the first Omen, but this is centering around the birth of Damien, the Antichrist, and the mystery behind like what was going on at the church he was growing up in. I won't go any further. Any other horror movies I saw? Let's see, Alien Romulus. That was a really good take on.
I heard great things about Alien Romulus.
Oh yeah, they did all the right things, like keeping the alien in the dark and not showing it off too much. They do go into some details, or they do look into some stuff that was hanging in from Prometheus and Alien Covenant, but they don't linger on it for too long. They actually give it enough explanation to, I guess, fill up that like little that little question that you're probably wondering is like, so what happened then? Because I don't think they're going to continue that trilogy anymore.
Mm-hmm.
The Prometheus trilogy, if you want to call it that. And I can't really think of any other horror movie that came out. But you did have something that we did agree upon, which was stuff that was most improved. But what about your honorable mentions?
I would say, talking about our most improved of the year, I totally forgot that was in the game plan. This was, while I don't say this movie was good, I will say everything I've seen from it is nothing short of impressive.
Mm-hmm.
And that is the sequel to one of your worst of the year last year.
Yeah.
With Winnie the Pooh Blood and Honey 2.
Yes.
This is a surprisingly, I won't say it's like a great movie.
No.
But it was a massive improvement and a massive leaps and bounds ahead of what's going to come for this director, because it was so much better.
Yes.
Rhys Frake Waterfield, who directed the first one, when he went to make the second one, he was genuinely surprised by how much he knew he was going to get backlash. He was very surprised though to see how much people didn't like the first one.
Mm-hmm.
So what he did was he brought in a bunch of some of people who are having great success with horror, including the screenwriter of the VHS horror series. Yeah. And he said, okay, what was wrong with my movie? What can I do? And they laid into him. And then Matt Leslie, who wrote the VHS horror series, he said, hey, I'll come help and work it in and work on it with you.
Yeah.
And what we get is exactly what you want. You want this story of this horror all centered around this Christopher Robin character. Mm-hmm. But the way they go about it is so powerful. The kills are insanely more creative and somehow way more bloodier.
Well, there's more blood because there's more victims this time around, as opposed to just the 5 or 6 people who died in the first movie.
Mm-hmm. And then they take that first movie and they say, yeah, that was a bad movie that was made in response to this actual tragedy, which was insanely creative.
That was a good idea. That was the Scream approach. I liked that so much. Yeah. And on top of that, just better budgeting. Well, I mean, they got a better budget because the first movie was really cheap to make, and when you make enough money off a cheap budget, you get all you practically need for the sequel. And they got better costumes for the creatures. They were all really, really done well, based off of different horror tropes and like personalities, which I would have criticism against, but because it's having fun with itself, I can't exactly blame the guys for having fun with those different personalities.
Oh yeah, and you have Marcus Macy as Owl, who is unironically a phenomenal villain.
He's really great.
This puppet master with this gorgeous design, and he really feels like the biggest threat. And then, of course, Winnie the Pooh says one line, and everyone's complaint with the first movie is when he goes, "You left." Yeah. And it's like, it's not going to be, "Oh, bother."
Oh, yeah.
And this second time around, they make sure
they get it.
That is what he says, and it's so good. Now, again, the movie's not. I would not go as far as to say this is a great movie or that good.
It's got problems in terms of like pacing, and I don't mean that it takes like a long time for things to happen. No, I mean like it goes around quite a bit.
And it relies a lot on homages for its scarier sequences, which when you see some of the dialogue and the way they find the heart and soul of the movie, you really wish they were more creative with the kills to connect to the story more.
Yeah.
But if Rhys Frake Waterfield is took this much and made this much better of a movie compared to his first one.
Yeah.
Whatever he's doing next, I think he's directing the Bambi movie because the guy who played...
No, I think it was so... I know that the guy... Here's what I know. The guy who played Christopher Robin, Scott Chambers, I believe that's his name.
Yeah.
He directed the upcoming Peter Pan Neverland Nightmare, which I actually just saw clips surrounding around the Tinkerbell character.
Mm-hmm.
It was creepy. It was really creepy. Then Waterfeld is directing the Pinocchio movie and the Pooniverse Monsters Assemble movie.
Yeah, Pinocchio Unstrung, and he's directing that one, which he also is producing.
Yeah, Bambi, I think they got a different director for that one.
Yeah, Bambi the Reckoning is what it's called.
The
What a funny...
Reckoning.
It seems like they're now having more fun with, we're going to go all out crazy with this.
Well, I've heard...
But outside of this universe, I'm curious if Rhys Frake Waterfield is going to do anything else, because... if he's taking this in stride and learning to take criticism in a day and age where people are like, my art, my passion, you just don't get what I'm saying.
Yeah.
He looks at it and says, they didn't get what I was trying to go for, but maybe I didn't know what I was trying to go for.
Mm-hmm.
And has such a vast improvement that I am genuinely curious what he's going to do next.
And somehow he's got a whole franchise going, even after that first flop, if you even want to call it.
Well, it wasn't a flop because it was made for like, what?
$500,000.
And it made $10 million at the box office.
Yeah.
And they took all that to make this level of a movie, which I think had $1 million budget.
Yeah, just $1 million budget, yeah.
Like, big props and big credit. This guy is knowing what he's doing, and I'm honestly looking forward to whatever he's up to next.
Yeah.
I think he's going to make a really goofy style.
Well, with Pinocchio, he's definitely going to do some pretty gnarly things. I know that, because he's described a particular scene that they're working on in the movie, and the Pinocchio doll, from what I heard, is actually going to be a puppet, like animatronic puppet.
That's going to be cool.
So excited to see that. And I've heard things about this Peter Pan movie that are, they are positive things, but I heard that this movie's really, really messed up.
Well, yeah, just from the trailer alone, I was like, I'm definitely not going to see it because the trailer is like, this is for a certain crowd of people that really, really appreciate horror like this.
If I had to say, and I haven't seen the movie yet, but if I had one little issue I had with this Peter Pan movie, or at the very least, it's the look of this Peter Pan. He's just a little too Joker looking for me.
Mm-hmm.
That's all I can say, really.
Yeah, and I will say for all this, I actually want to see what Rhys Frake Waterfield is going to do from here on out, because if he's taking criticism, taking it in stride, and learning to direct better and better,
yes,
and is saying there's nowhere to go but up, I'm really excited to see what he's up to.
Yeah.
And speaking of things we're up to, what are you looking forward to the most this year in 2025?
I guess I'm looking forward to the Superman movie by James Gunn the most.
Mm-hmm.
That's probably the one thing I'm really looking forward to. I keep forgetting what's coming up, like TV-wise or whatever, but... I'm hoping to see DC really win a home run with Superman, because even though I love Henry Cavill's Man of Steel, I can understand why it probably didn't get all the spotlight it did.
Yeah, after seeing Creature Commandos, I'm excited to see where this universe is going.
Same, yeah, I can't wait to see where we go. With Superman, it feels like it's going to be I've only watched a little bit of The Boys, but it feels like it's going to be the anti-version of The Boys.
Mm-hmm. It's going to directly say why Superman is good and why that's important and necessary.
Yeah. And
really sits with what makes Superman so relatable.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm excited to see what they do with him in this movie. And this one trailer, just pure vibes. The second you see Crypto the Superdog, you're cheering yes, Crypto is finally here.
We've got Crypto. I think if there was any other, we're getting a sequel to Megan. Did you hear about that movie?
I've heard about Megan and everything they're doing there.
I thought Megan was fine for what it was. I have a cousin named Megan. I showed her the poster of the movie, and of course she wasn't all the biggest fans, but little cousin teasing the other cousin. In terms of what else is coming out, please tell me.
28 Years Later is coming out.
28 Years Later, that's right. Please tell me the Lightning Thief Season 2 is coming out.
Yeah, I believe it is.
Okay, so that's something I'm looking forward to.
We also have Jurassic World Rebirth. I would not be excited if it wasn't
Gareth Edwards.
If it wasn't Gareth Edwards directing it.
I don't know if I'm going to see it in theaters, but if I hear enough good things, if I get invited, then sure.
They got Jonathan Bailey and Scarlett Johansson to star in it, so I'm already looking forward to that. And then we also have Tron Ares coming out this year.
That's right, I remember.
I have a brother who is very much into Tron, so there's a lot they're going to go with, and that trailer looks like they're taking everything from this franchise and bringing it into here.
There we go.
We have Avatar 3 coming on out with the Fire Na'vi people. I'm personally more excited about that than most.
I'm just like, okay, well, if he tries something a little different, which, I mean, obviously he is with the fire people, if he does something different story-wise, too, we'll see how this handles, yeah.
We have Wake Up Dead Man, which is the third of the Knives Out mysteries.
Yes, I actually looked up the trailer for that the other day. It looks really fun.
Kaylee Spaney, Jeremy Renner, Josh Brolin, and there's so many more that are in here. We also have Sinners, directed by Ryan Coogler, starring Michael B. Jordan and Haley Steinfeld. With, it looks like Michael B. Jordan is playing both the vampire twin and the hunter. And that's so exciting. We also have Fantastic Four.
Fantastic Four. Will this one finally be fantastic?
In a couple weeks, we have Mickey 17,
yes.
which I am really excited for.
I've looked up the plot, but I haven't watched the trailer. I don't know if I should.
Thunderbolts looks like it's going to be a lot of fun. I think
it looks okay.
That one, I think I'm more excited because I love all these characters they're bringing in.
Yeah.
And that looks like it's going to be a fun time. I think Elio by Pixar.
That's right, the Pixar movie.
There's been a lot of talk about what's been going on behind the scenes of the movie.
Oh, no.
But honestly, that's done better for... Pixar has... The only time they've had a smooth production was Toy Story 3. Mm-hmm. Every other movie has gone through some major change or shakeup that was like, oh boy.
Damn.
Every single one. That's what's crazy to me.
Yeah.
We also have Zootopia 2 with the question, why were reptiles not in the first one? Because there was a reason, but they just didn't get to say it in the first one.
Okay.
So there's a good air of mystery around here. Of course, Wicked Part 2 is coming on out.
The Conjuring 5, which I'm actually not excited for. I haven't seen the third one or the fourth. Well, I don't think it's the fifth one. It's the fourth one, I guess.
FNAF 2 is coming on out, and I like the first FNAF movie, so I
wasn't that into it, yeah.
And looking at some of the other stuff, also, I'm curious to see how Captain America is going to do.
I mean, yeah, I know it got bad test screenings, but we'll see, because
that first trailer, though.
The first trailer looks pretty cool.
That was pretty awesome. Oh, we also have Mission Impossible, the last one coming on out.
I'm not the biggest fan of Mission Impossible, but I mean, I do like the set pieces of those movies every now and then.
And then, have you heard anything about the movie Wolfman?
Wolfman, that's the, somewhat reboot, requel of the Wolfman. It's directed by Lee Whannell, the guy who did, he was a screenwriter on the Saw movies, the first one at least, I think maybe the second and the third one. And then he went on to direct Insidious, one of those movies, and he also directed The Invisible Man. So
they say he's bringing another classic theme to the 21st century with Poor Things scoundrel Christopher Abbott as a family man who's feeling a little hairy after a full moon encounter at his childhood home.
I have only seen maybe one trailer of the movie, and it was a trailer that showed the title.
Oh, Steven Soderbergh is back, and he's going to do a movie called Presence, which is a horror movie with his Hollywood screenwriter David Koepp.
Exactly. That's where I'm like, Koepp. Interesting. Not that I hate David Koepp, but I don't think his dialogue's always the best every now and then.
There are so many that are coming out this year that look really, really fun.
Yeah.
Also, I should emphasize, looks like Mickey 17 is coming out in March. Mm-hmm. And March 7th, which that looks like it'll be really, really fun.
I think we've got a Michael Jackson biopic coming out later this year called Jackson, or Michael actually, it's just called Michael.
Also in April, Passion of the Christ Resurrection is happening by Mel Gibson. I don't know how that's gonna go.
I don't know either.
Because I appreciate the first movie and what it was trying to do. Who knows what the second one is going to do? But also, after seeing The Chosen, it's just like, I think the Jesus story has been told perfectly with The Chosen.
Yeah.
And it's still not done, so it's like, can't we just keep that one going? Which, I know they're not involved in any way, but...
Yeah.
It's just one of those things where it's like, why are you making this one after all these years? Mm-hmm. But yeah, 28 years later, I will say that trailer using the Boots monologue, I was like, oh, this could be really, really cool. Also, yeah, July has... I feel bad for Jurassic World Rebirth. It's coming out at the same time as Superman and Fantastic Four.
Oh, no.
And then apparently there's a Smurfs movie coming out. And I Know What You Did Last Summer.
I know What You Did Last Summer. I didn't know they were going to do another Smurfs movie, but I guess if it's palpable enough. Is it animated?
I don't know.
I would assume it's animated because I heard the live action stuff wasn't exactly doing well with them. And those were back in early if not mid 2010s when they started making those Smurfs movies.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I never saw them in theaters.
Well, apparently Maggie Gyllenhaal is directing a musical version of The Bride based around The Bride of Frankenstein.
Yes, I heard about that also.
That's interesting.
Then we got Guillermo del Toro's Frankenstein, I believe, coming out this year.
Probably. And then, Black Phone 2 is going to be happening.
I mean, we'll see what they do with the Black Phone, because I really liked that first movie.
Yeah. Yeah, everything seems like 2025 is shaping up to be a really, really awesome year, and I think it's going to go well.
Yeah.
And I think, friends, that'll be all from us today. And thank you so much for joining us. Head on over to Instagram. Let us know what was not your favorite experience of the year, what was your favorite movie experience of the year, and what are you looking forward to most in 2025. Until then, we'll see you next time. Take care.